to your XREFs here. So at the very top, when I click on the XREF in the list, down here at the bottom under details, I'll see the first option there is reference name. And what this will allow me to do, let me expand this out a little bit. And can I expand this out? There we go. I can click there where it says reference name, and I can give this a new name. Perhaps I just want to call this FPL for floor plan, or floor plan FPL1. I can reduce or change the name of that XREF so that it's not using the entire file name. What a lot of clients I see, that they'll have really long file names because they're using project numbers along with issue dates and things like that, and revision numbers. And you have a 30 or 40 character long file name pretty soon. And when you go to your layer property manager, those layers which are displayed for the XREFs here in the layer property manager will carry, whoops, I forgot to turn on my little e-pointer that you're all familiar with if you've attended this before. We'll have here now the names of the name of the XREF being used as the prefix for the layers for that particular XREF. And if I click here on my XREF layer filter, I'll see that those layers now just have the FPL as a prefix. So you can go through and name all your XREFs according to some internally recognized name, floor plan FPL, maybe A for architectural versus L for landscape XREF. That way you can also more easily categorize or organize the layers as they display in the layer property manager. So that's a nice little tip, and that's actually been available for quite a long time, but a lot of people don't realize that they do have the ability to name or rename XREFs. It's also kind of nice because sometimes you might update an XREF, you have a new issue of that particular file from your consultant. It's nice to be able to just maybe give it a name, consultant, Acme Consulting FPL or whatever, and that way when they send you a new file with a different name, it doesn't appear incorrectly here. It's got its own internal name that you're using. All right, so that's just talking about XREF names there. Whoops, that's not at all what I wanted to do. Hang on. Oh, GoToMeeting console is kind of getting in my way, so I need to move that for a second. And we'll close that out of there. So the next thing I want to talk about is some selection options that we have in AutoCAD. A lot of people are familiar, or you're probably already, everybody's familiar with the ability to select individual items. Of course, you can click directly on items. One thing that we find, though, oftentimes, let me find maybe a better one here. Here we go. When you're working in AutoCAD, that you have, in this case, I've got a lot of blocks. I've got a whole bunch of these chairs, and I'd like to select all these chairs so I can delete them, change their layer, make some modification to them. Now, one of the things we might be able to do is do a quick select, but that's a little bit more involved. One thing I like to do is to select an item and right-click, and we'll see that there is an option called, right here, called Select Similar. And what this will allow me to do, when I select Similar, what it will do for me is to select all the blocks in this case, which are of the same name and on the same layer. That's important to know. That's the default. Blocks of the same, objects of the same name. So the block name, or perhaps line, arc, circle, polyline, and on the same layer. So if somebody has placed one of these blocks on the wrong layer, it won't get selected. But if you're familiar with the drawing, maybe you created it and you're confident in your layer standards, then this could be a great way to quickly select all of the items of a specific type. And if you go to your properties, then of course maybe you can see how many you've selected and get a count of those. You can also move, copy, any of your modification tools. There's another option there in the right-click menu, which is called Create Similar. And I like this tool because perhaps I've got a situation. I need to draw in a line in here somewhere, and I would like to place that line on the same layer as these white wall lines in this file. But currently, I have the layer Furniture set as current. When I select one of these lines, though, that's on layer Walls, I can right-click and choose this option, which is Add Selected. what's nice about that, when I say add selected, is that it will start the line command, because that's what I selected, and you see it will place that line onto the same layer as the line which I originally selected without having to change the current layer. Sometimes that can be nice if you're doing a lot of back and forth between layers and then you realize you forgot to draw some little chunk of line work here that needs to get filled in. Select one of those, say add selected, and I didn't even have to go find the current layer. I could just draw that in but still leave the layer furniture as the current layer. That'll also work in other forms of AutoCAD. If you're using AutoCAD architecture, you can select a wall, right-click and say Add Selected, and it will add another wall of that particular type to your drawing. That'll work for blocks as well. I guess you could do that, but copy is probably what most people would use for that. But Add Selected will just go and insert another copy of that same block, and it takes you through all the options on screen, scale, rotation, all that kind of thing. But that's another way to add an object. So those are Create Similar and Select Similar through the right-click menu once you selected an item. And I should point out, when you start, that's through the right-click. If you actually type the command, Select Similar, if you type out the whole command, you'll notice that on the command line there is actually a settings option for Select Similar. And you'll see here that by default, these are the defaults, layer and name are checked. So any object that is on the same layer of the same name will get selected when you do Select Similar. If you uncheck layer and just leave name checked, when you right click, say Select Similar, pick all objects of the same name. So it would pick all lines on all layers. I found that if you uncheck name and just leave layer selected, it will not select all the lines on layer walls or whatever the situation might be. It doesn't seem to work that way. But you can also go in, and if you've overridden properties by of objects individually, you can also modify some of these settings to get a little bit finer control over what gets selected with Select Similar. Also, when it comes to selecting, I find a lot of people don't know. Maybe sometimes it's because of new users who are maybe self-taught, just beginning their AutoCAD voyage. They don't realize that we have multiple options for selecting objects. Most people do know, of course, that you can always select an item. I'm just going to use the erase command. You get your little tiny pick box, and you can change the size of that, of course, but you can select individual objects. You can always do Shift to deselect. What a lot of people I find, or new users often don't find, is that you can select multiple objects at once using various kinds of windows. If you select in empty space and drag your cursor, so I click and release and drag the cursor to the right, I'll see that objects fully within this box will get selected. So I can do another one here, and it's not previewing. I think I have the preview function sometimes gets overridden by the GoToMeeting system, so it's not actually highlighting those items, but you'll see as I get an item entirely within my box, I can then click and select those items. I can also do what's called a crossing window. If I pick an empty space in my drawing and drag from left to right, AutoCAD is going to select any objects that are simply touched by the edges or fully contained within this green box. So that combination of those two can be very helpful to select multiple items. A big crossing window to just pick a bunch of items inside of a space. Perhaps a standard selection window to select an item that's maybe inside of or touching other objects, and you don't want to select the larger objects outside. We do also have the ability, this is one that a lot of people don't know, to use a fence to select objects. So I started the erase command, it's asking me to select objects. It doesn't show me the option on the command line, but if I type F and enter, F for fence, what this lets me do is draw a line. It's called a fence. And any objects that are touched by this fence, when I hit enter, are going to get selected. So if you have a bunch of objects inside of, kind of scattered among other objects, fence can be one way to quickly select items. I don't typically rely on that because I can also use my combination of crossing windows, just very narrow crossing windows to select items. And also we have the ability to draw crossing and window polygons. So again, while it's asking me to select objects, I can type CP for crossing polygon, and now what happens is that I can draw this polygon and any items, because I chose crossing, any items which are touched by this crossing polygon, when I hit enter, you see those, nope, I can't have it actually do the, I can't have it bow tied like that. So it does actually have to go, let me get it here, there we go. Now when I hit enter, any objects that were touched by that, it's obviously a little bit of a cumbersome tool to use. You kind of have to plan ahead, as I showed there, exactly how it gets used. You can also type WP to do a window polygon, which requires that you draw that box, the polygon, around, completely around any of the objects you would like to select. Oftentimes you'll also find, so the next tip I'd like to show you is that oftentimes you'll select items, you'll make a change to them. I'm going to grab all the stuff inside this room and move it a little bit to the north. And then I change my mind. I decided I want to move them back to the south. So if I immediately change my mind and want to make a change, when I start the move command or any modification tool again, and it says select objects, I can type the letter P for previous and hit enter, and it will reselect the previous selection set. I use that quite frequently. When I'll make a change, I realize I didn't do it right, I typed the wrong distance, or made the wrong choice. Start the command over again, type P, and grab them and move them again. If you undo, it will also get rid of that selection set. So oftentimes undo isn't maybe what I want to use, so I start the command and use P for previous to reselect those items. Another one I'd like to talk about, kind of changing gears a little bit. This is somewhat new. I believe maybe 2 years ago, this new feature was introduced. The copy command, which we're all familiar with. Let's see, there's a block. Let's grab that. Let's grab all these, and we'll make a copy out here. When you start the copy command, and I'm going to tell you right now, this is one that the entire office here, all of the AutoCAD users here, were not aware of. I'm not sure how it kind of went under our radar, but just recently one of the techs was informed about this, and we thought it was pretty impressive. When I start the copy command and select the items to copy and hit enter, it'll ask me then to select a base point. I go ahead and select the base point for the copy, and at this stage, as I'm copying this item out here, if I look down here on the command line, there's an option called Array. When you click the array or type A for array, AutoCAD is going to ask you to specify the number of items in the array. I'll say 6 and hit enter. And look at that. I've just turned my copy command into a linear array. It's not going to do, it's more like well, it's not like any of the array commands now. It's just going to copy a line of these objects. So by default, it asks me for the second point. So it's going to array these objects based on the first array distance between the first and second object. So I'll go ahead and type this over. I'll pull this over and say 20 feet. And we'll see it creates an array of 6 objects spaced at 20 feet. I can also, when I start the copy command, let me grab this whole line now, go ahead and pick my base point of display for displacement. And now, as I'm copying these, choose the array command again, enter a number, I'll do 5 this time. Now, what I wanted to specify is not the spacing between these rows, I can use the next option on the command line, which is fit, we see down here on the command line. So F, or click on the fit option. Now what I'm doing is spacing these out for a total distance. This is basically like using the measure option in the new array command as opposed to the fit, the divide option. So as I pull this out here, I can say let's space these out at 100 feet, and it arrays my 5 desks at 100 feet, so basically 25 or 20 feet on center. So that's a new feature that a lot of people haven't noticed is in there. It's been maybe in there a couple of years, I believe. Another cool feature. This is I'll call it an undocumented feature. I don't know if that's really true. I personally have not found any documentation on this, and I can't take credit for this. One of my students actually discovered this in one of my classes one day, but it has to do with polar tracking. Many of you will use polar tracking or are familiar with polar tracking down here, and you may have noticed that the predefined list just has a predefined list of increments for polar tracking. Mine's set at 90. Oftentimes I'll set this at 45. Let me just quickly show you, for those of you who don't use this, basically what polar tracking allows me to do is have AutoCAD snap to predefined increments, in this case 45-degree increments, all the way around a 360-degree circle. And we can set that by right-clicking here on polar tracking. Let me zoom in on that one a little bit. It's this icon right here. We can click on that, right-click on that, and we can choose other increments, and we can also click down here at the bottom where it says Settings. And in here, I can also set my polar increment. And many people are aware that you can add additional angles. If I choose additional angles and click New, I could say, you know what, as I'm moving my crosshair around, I'd like it to snap to 0, 45, 90, and so on. But I also want it to click at 37.5 degrees because that's perhaps some unique angle to my project. But what I have to do, well, basically what happens is AutoCAD will stop at 37.5, but it's not going to stop at 37.5 degree increments. It's only going to stop at 45 degree increments plus 37.5. So if you wanted to add in other increments at that 37.5, you'd have to type those in as other additional angles. However, this is the trick that we discovered recently. Up here where it says increment angle, if I would actually like AutoCAD to stop at something other than maybe something finer, maybe I need it to stop at 3-degree increments all the way around the circle, all the way around 360 degrees. I can click right here in the increment angle window and type my own increment angle. Now when I say OK and start my line command, I'll see AutoCAD is going to snap. Let me turn off my actual snap mode. You see here, it's going to snap at, why is it snapping there? 39, it's snapping at 1-degree increments. What's going on there? Should be snapping to, there we go, 38. Let's see here. It's snapping at 1-degree increments. That's interesting. Maybe, I think my units actually, what's happening is that my units are rounding off here. It ought to snap to whatever now increment you have typed into that window, into that selection list. So as I right-click here on polar tracking, you see now I have a 3-degree increment listed here. I've not seen it ever do that where I typed in a different angle and now it's not snapping exactly to that angle. So might need to experiment with that a little bit and see what the limitations are. But that was one that we've kind of played around with. Actually, I had a client ask for a 1-degree snap increment and we were able to add it to the list there. Okay, so the next thing we'd like to look at, or I want to show, is a common question actually that happens when a lot of people have upgraded. Maybe you've moved forward from a much older version of AutoCAD recently, but it has to do with the status bar down here at the bottom, these set of icons. I was just showing you the polar tracking. In older versions of AutoCAD, we didn't see icons down there. What we saw was little abbreviations, little pieces of text. The newer versions of AutoCAD, it defaults to these icons. You have a lot of questions about this. If you would like to revert AutoCAD back to show the icons down here, all you have to do is right-click on any one of these icons. Doesn't matter which one. Right-click on it and simply uncheck Use Icons. And now you have your pieces of text across the bottom that show Polar and Ortho and OSNAP, as opposed to little icons that are really tiny and hard to see. A lot of people much prefer the text here across the bottom. Simple one, but we get a lot of questions for that one. All right, the next thing I'd like to look at is with regard to, there's a couple tools here about using hatch patterns and working with hatch patterns. You might find that oftentimes you would like to create or snap to a hatch of some kind. Let me just throw a hatch in here. I thought I had one already, but we'll throw something in here. You would like to snap to the line work within a given hatch. Let's go, there we go. Maybe I want to pull a line off of the endpoint of one of these hatch lines. But when I start the line command, you see that I can't actually snap to that hatch line work in there. If it's really necessary that you snap to the line work inside of a hatch, we do have the ability to do that. You're going to find this option inside the options dialog box. I typed OP to get the options here. And on the drafting tab, down here in the lower left corner, there is an option called Ignore Hatch Objects. So when that's checked, it is ignoring hatch objects as I'm snapping. Here it is for your auto snap. I'm going to uncheck Ignore Hatch Objects and hit OK. Now when I start the line command, you'll see I'm actually able to snap to the endpoints of my hatch lines and any other snap points. So if I wanted to, I could actually draw a line or circle at the intersection of hatch patterns. It keeps me from having to explode a hatch because I need to be able to access those points in there. I can still use the hatch and then still access O-snaps within the hatch pattern. It can get kind of annoying because then AutoCAD is going to try and snap to every O-snap along hatch pattern. So I like to turn that one on and off as necessary. So I'll turn Ignore Hatch Patterns back on again, and we'll see that now it'll ignore the O-snaps. On a related note, actually this just kind of came to me here, but I'll show you here, oftentimes as you are moving around in AutoCAD, if you have, say, you're in a modification tool, AutoCAD now by default has this preview behavior where it highlights and makes dashed or bold any object that you hover on when you're in a modification tool, and sometimes when you're just moving your crosshairs. Here we go, you see it's highlighting. And it can get really annoying when you have lots of hatch patterns in your file. Maybe your entire file is comprised of large hatched boundaries. In the Options dialog, under the Selection tab, down here in the lower list, there's a box called Visual Effect Settings. And, well, actually there's a preview window right here is really what we're looking at. And you can actually change how AutoCAD previews your selections. You can tell it to preview when a command is active and when no command is active. Maybe if I uncheck no command, basically it won't preview until I start a actual modification command. You can also click the Visual Effects Settings button and then furthermore go into the Advanced Options button here, and you can actually tell it to exclude hatches here. If I check hatches, it will exclude hatches from the preview. Now, when I start the erase command, you see I can still highlight line work in my project, but when I hover on top of the hatch pattern, it will not try and bold and highlight that. That's really nice when you have very, very large hatch patterns too, complex hatch patterns on a slow computer, and you hover there and AutoCAD freezes for a split second while it tries to highlight that pattern. So that's a nice one to be able to turn that off so that it's not bogging your system down as you're moving your cursor around in the drawing. Okay, so moving on, still with regard to working with hatches, another interesting feature oftentimes we need to do is to change the origin of a hatch pattern. Perhaps I wanted to show inside the sidewalk here a brick pattern for maybe for pavers. Let's do, I'm not sure what I need to, looks like I need to go much bigger on that. And it's still not showing me there. I'm not sure what the hatch pattern scale ought to be for this one. There we go. There we go. So let's go down. Let's go a little smaller. I want to show pattern, a hatch pattern here, and I wanted the pattern to start specifically from a point in my drawing. Maybe I wanted to start from a full brick up here at this corner, and it's almost laying out on its own without me having to do that. But let's put this on a specific layer that's a little easier to see. I want to have the brick pattern start at this corner for some specific reason, just the hatch pattern in general. When you select the hatch pattern, if you're using the ribbon now, you get this Hatch Editor Contextual tab, and here there'll be a button that says Set Origin. When I click Set Origin, I can then click in the drawing, and AutoCAD will redistribute that hatch pattern so that it starts at that specific location. That can also be very useful, not only for this kind of thing where it's supposed to represent a real-world object and it needs to start from a specific point. Oftentimes this is helpful on like building elevations You want the break pattern to start at the bottom on a whole unit. This can also be useful for those of you who work on large drawings with very large coordinates. So basically having to create hatches very, very far from your origin. If you're working a file that's many, many, many units, if you're working with maybe feet and inches, but you've drawn the file so that a particular hatch pattern ends up thousands and tens or hundreds of thousands of inches from the origin, oftentimes your hatch patterns will go just a little bit crazy. They won't clean up anymore. They'll have broken lines where there should be nice clean corners and things like that. Or it'll show lots of straight lines where you wanted to show more curved lines. Resetting the origin of that hatch to something closer to the hatch itself will often repair that hatch and let it display properly in the drawing. So that's often accomplished. It's easily accomplished by selecting the hatch pattern, clicking Set Origin, and reselecting a new location on that hatch. All right, so rolling right along, let's do another one. Zoom out here. Actually, let me skip ahead. What I've just did there, another common kind of, hey, how'd you do that we get is when we're presenting, people will notice that I'm quickly cycling through multiple drawings open on my computer, open in this session of AutoCAD, without moving the mouse. I'm not going up and clicking on anything. I'm not clicking down here on the status bar, on the quick view drawings or anything like that. Some people don't realize that you can actually cycle through or toggle through multiple open drawings by holding the Control key down on the keyboard and tapping the Tab key. So I tap Tab, I tab again, and it'll cycle through one drawing at a time. This is really handy when you have maybe 4 or 5 drawings open. When you get maybe 8 or 10, this isn't quite as useful because it's kind of like changing the channels on the TV. You have so many channels that sometimes it's easier just to click directly on the one you want to access. In 2014, AutoCAD also introduced these file tabs across the top. I didn't think I'd like these at first, but I actually really like them. They give me a lot of functionality. And you'll notice here when you watch the tabs, as I do Control Tab, it cycles through in the order of those tabs. If I want to change the order of these drawings, I can actually drag and drop the tabs, change the order of those, because maybe I went through and I opened up level 1, then level 3, then level 2 in that order. I can reorder them across the top, and now as I Control Tab, it will cycle through those drawings in the order they're displayed here in the tabs. You can alternatively do Control Shift Tab, and that will cycle backwards through the list of drawings. It's not a little more difficult to do that one because your right hand's on the mouse and your left hand's trying to click 3 buttons at once, but that is also an option there. Control Shift Tab to cycle backwards through. I use Control Tab all the time. I find some people have never discovered that one by, perhaps by accident or had it shown to them. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to talk about, I'm going to kind of switch gears again. I'm going to talk about blocks. Many people are familiar with the block editor. I won't get into the block editor itself here. I'm going to show it, but I'm not going to really. I don't have time to just explain how it works. But if I decide that I would like to modify this block, if I make a particular change to this block and then save that change, we'll notice that, of course, it made that change in every single instance of that block. That's how blocks behave. What if I need a one-off situation? I need a cubicle without a circle drawn in here, and I want to leave that circle on all of the other blocks in this drawing. When I go into the block editor, when I make the change here, as opposed to just clicking Close Block Editor and then saying, yes, save changes, over here at the far left of the ribbon, we'll see that there's a button that says Save Block. Okay, well, that's just going to save my cubicle block, and all of them are going to update as I make the change. But if I click the little itty-bitty drop down under the Save Block panel, I'll see there's another option called Save Block As. And when I choose that, it's going to let me give this a new name. I'll choose the cubicle and then add 002 to it and hit OK. Now when I close this, you'll see what it's done. It didn't update that block. What it did was create basically a copy of this block with a small change to it. So now I can do the insert command and go find cubicle 002 and hit OK, and I can make a one-off block, or a block that was based on the original but has some changes made to it. A lot of people will, alternatively, what they'll do is explode the block and then do the block command again and recreate the block using a new name. I like this feature because there's always the potential when you explode a block of breaking your attributes if you don't know how attributes work, or of just forgetting to add a particular object or select a particular object to add it into the block. Save block as keeps everything happening, everything working within the block editor. Again, also on the subject of blocks, sometimes you have a situation where you want to get an idea, just a quick idea of how many blocks of a particular type or blocks of all types are currently present in the drawing and visible in the drawing. There is a command called bcount. Oh, so it's B-C-O-U-N-T, as in block count, bcount. When you type that command, it's going to say select objects. What you have to do, I'm going to do just a big crossing window here and pick everything in the drawing. When I hit enter, I'm going to hit F2 then to pull up the text window. We'll see what AutoCAD now does is give me a list of the names of the blocks which were in that selection set and the number of blocks of each type. So I see I had 37 cubicle blocks, 97 chairs, and I had one of those cubicle 002s I just created. That's a really nice feature just to get a quick count. How many of block A, block B, block C do I have in a particular area or in the entire drawing? I like that feature just to do a quick count, just to get some idea of where my drawing stands currently. So that's called bcount is the command. All right, so let's shift gears one more time. We're going to go to talk about what's going on here in a layout. I'm going to switch to one of my layout tabs. There is a system variable called VP rotate assoc. Viewport rotate assoc. Let me start typing that out, and we'll see that it displays here with my suggestion list here, VP rotate assoc. I'll leave that up so everybody can get a look at it. Let's see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. VP rotate assoc. When I start that command, that system variable, it's set to 1 currently in this drawing, so it's turned on. Let me show you what that does. When I rotate this viewport now, if I rotate it 45 degrees, I'll see that the drawing inside the viewport is going to automatically rotate with the viewport. It's associated with the viewport. If I set VP, let's undo that. If I set VP rotate assoc to 0, now when I rotate my viewport, it will rotate around the drawing but not show the drawing at that new orientation. So if you have a need to take one of your viewports, maybe you have a drawing which is oriented north-south, kind of along the long axis north-south in model space, but it's going to fit better on your sheet horizontally, rather than having to do a lot of work with maybe rotating a UCS and doing the plan and DV twist and all these kind of things, you might just try VP rotate assoc, turn it on, set it to 1, rotate the viewport, and that might be all you need to just reorient the drawing quickly to the layout. So maybe you have a portrait oriented drawing for some reason, you can rotate the drawing very quickly using VP rotate assoc. Let's see, let's keep on going. I do see there's questions popping up here. I'm going to go through, I think what I'm going to do is at the end I'm going to come back and I'll go through these questions one by one. I will do my best here, try and leave about 10 minutes here at the end to kind of cover and circle back on a few of these questions here. But I got a few other things I really want to show everybody because they're really pretty cool stuff. Another cool feature, I think everything's cool. Those of you who've listened to me before hear me say it all the time. I always say cool feature, my favorite feature, all these cool things that I find in AutoCAD. But another feature we have in AutoCAD is the ability to change the zoom level, the zoom factor, as we use the scroll wheel on the mouse to zoom in. I've had several requests actually recently for this, several questions if this was possible. And it is. I can actually change so that my scroll wheel zooms into a smaller increment or to a larger increment. And the way I do that is by typing the system variable called zoom factor. Zoom factor. When I hit enter there, it's going to ask me to enter a new value for zoom factor. You can type between a value of 1 and 100. basically a percentage. So if I were to type here a value of 20, now as I scroll, I know you can't see me scrolling my mouse, but as I scroll forward, I see it's zooming to a much smaller increment as I zoom in. You can kind of see it hopping there. If I type zoom factor, got to type all O's, not zeros. Not sure how I did that. Type zoom factor and set it to 100. That's as high as it'll go. Now you see as I scroll, it jumps a lot more between each click of the scroll, each click forward or back. So that can be really nice for those of you working in very large drawings that you need to be able to zoom and pan around much more quickly. Zoom factor is your friend there. Now another one relating to the zoom wheel, I'm going to set mine back to 60 here, just so that's what I'm used to. Another interesting and maybe not as useful, at least for day-to-day use, another interesting system variable we have is called zoom wheel. Zoom wheel. When you type zoom wheel, it's going to ask you to enter a new value for zoom wheel. As you see, it's set to 0. 0 means that your zoom wheel is going to behave as it has always behaved. You scroll forward on the mouse wheel, you zoom in. You scroll back on the mouse wheel, you zoom out. However, if you set zoom wheel to 1, it reverses the behavior of your scroll wheel on the mouse. I'm not saying that most of you would have need for this. The only reason for real functionality, for practical purposes, if you happen to be an inventor, an Autodesk Inventor user, Inventor is the opposite of AutoCAD by default. You can change it in Inventor, you can change it in AutoCAD, whichever one is most fitting for your use. You can reverse the behavior of the scroll wheel. Or you can do this to one of your coworkers while they're away for lunch, and when they get back and they start using their mouse wheel, they'll really think they've gone crazy when the mouse behaves the opposite of what they're used to, and they can't quite figure out what's wrong. I'll tell you from personal experience that that's exactly how they'll think. They'll scratch their heads and think that they've lost their minds. One of my coworkers, Warren, for those of you who know that, did that to me one day while I was at lunch in the middle of one of my classes, and I really had to stop and think what was going on before I realized, well, somebody had probably been messing around with my AutoCAD. So that's a fun prank to play. Keep that one for April 1st. That's a good joke to play on your coworkers. But don't tell them you heard it from me. All right, another tool we can look at, I'd like to show, is the Align tool. So any of you out there that maybe use Revit, you're going to use the Align tool. Align is one of our, as every Revit user's favorite tool, one of our favorite tools. Big time saver. A lot of people don't realize that there's an Align tool in AutoCAD. The shortcut is AL. You can start the Align command, or if you'd like to use the ribbon on the Modify Slide Out, Modify Panel Slide Out, we'll see the Align tool is hiding here in the lower left. AL for Align. What this is going to let me do is select first the object I would like to align to something else. I'm just going to move this little cubicle, which has been scaled wrong, and it's in the wrong orientation. I want to rotate it 180 degrees. Rather than having to use a combination of the rotate command, maybe rotate with reference, and then scale, and maybe scale with reference, what I can do with the Align command is specify matching points. You see what it says is specify first source point. I'm going to pick the lower right corner of this cubicle, and then it's going to ask me to specify first destination point. I'm going to pick the upper left corner of that cubicle, and it's going to draw this kind of preview line in there for me. And if I pan, it goes away. But then I'm going to pick the second point and the second destination point. And if I want to pick a third point, I can do that. That's going to make it a 3D align. I'm just going to hit enter at this point because you see it says continue on the command line. So I hit enter. And it's going to ask me the question, scale objects based on aligned points, question mark. If I say no, here's what I get. You see it rotated. It aligned that cubicle with the same line on the other line on this other cubicle, but it left it the same size. Let's undo that back. Let's start align one more time. I'll go through this quickly. I'll pick the cubicle, pick the starting point, pick the second destination point here. I'm going to pick the second starting point, pick the second destination point. I'm going to hit enter to continue, and when it says select scale objects based on alignment points, this time I'm going to say yes. And you see it will both rotate, it will align this cubicle with the other cubicle, and scale the object to those, basically the distance between those 2 points. So that can be a really useful tool for quickly rotating an object into place and scaling it to the correct size. It's a combination of those two commands built into one. So that's your align command. Another tool I'd like to talk about is another little tip, I guess I'll say. I'm kind of running long on some of these suggestions here, so I'm going to hop ahead in my list. I want to talk about fillet, the fillet command. Let's find something that I want to fillet. Most people are familiar with the fillet command. You can choose the radius option, and you can specify a new radius angle, and it will fillet at a radius there. And you know that it will hold that setting until you change it back to 0 or some other value, or you restart AutoCAD or restart that drawing. What a lot of people don't know is that you can permanently lock in a fillet radius for a particular drawing. There's a system variable called fillet rad. Fillet radius is short for fillet RAD. And for those of you who don't know, it's another tip. It is called fillet, not fillet. I always make a big joke out of that in my classes, but this one has 2 L's, not 1, so it is fillet, like a fillet weld. So we start the fillet rad system variable, and it'll ask me to specify a new value. I guess I had preset this one to 2. Let me set that one to 5. Now, when I start the fillet command, I'll see that the radius automatically defaults to a radius of 5. Even if I close this drawing, I close AutoCAD and come back tomorrow, next time I reopen this drawing, by default, when I start the fillet command, it will always set the fillet radius to 5. I can override it, set it back to 0, but if in a particular drawing all fillets are intended to be a specific radius, or most of them are, you can override it. That's a per drawing setting. I also like to point that out because I have had on at least 2 occasions somebody come to me with a drawing and saying, man, I keep erasing objects, and when I erase the objects, I get these little blips left behind all over the place. And so we zoomed in really, really close to these blips, and we discovered that they were little tiny radiuses, little tiny arcs. And somehow in that drawing, somebody had gone in and set the fillet radius, the fillet rad, to a very tiny number, like tenths of an inch or less, something like that. And so every time somebody had used the fillet command in the drawing, so this drawing had been around for for a long time, every time they use a fillet command, we'd end up with a little itty-bitty arc there in the corner, so small that we couldn't see it at our typical working zoom levels, but it would leave behind basically a little pixel when you would erase, and then when you zoom in and regen, you discovered it was an arc. So if you're finding that kind of odd behavior, it could be that somebody accidentally set fillet radius to some other value, some very, very small value. Maybe they picked 2 points on screen, and you got this tiny little arc now. So you can set that back to 0 and go through and clean up all those arcs. Okay, so let's see. Let's take a look at the list and see what else we have in here. Oh, another one I like to show off. When you are working with drawings that have lots of objects like text, annotations, like, let's see, what do I have here? Blocks. I don't have any text in here. But I do want to show we have the ability, when we are working with annotations, maybe you have a lot of text, maybe you have a lot of, let's set this to something, maybe you have dimensions in your drawing, and as you're drawing these, you're finding that maybe hatch patterns have been created that are now covering up. I'll just kind of break this drawing intentionally right here. Maybe you have hatch patterns that are now sitting in front of annotation objects. They're sitting in front of dimensions, they're sitting in front of text, they're sitting in front of pretty much any other kind of annotation here. And you would like to go through, maybe this is happening globally all over the place, and you've got dozens of these that you would like to fix so that the text reads in front of the hatch patterns, reads in front of other lines. Hiding on the Home tab, on the Modify slide out, if you click the slide out there, we'll see in the lower right corner there is a series of tools here for changing the draw order. Many of you will be familiar with the fact that you can change the order of objects kind of on a one-by-one basis, but if you click this drop-down, you'll see that there's a series of tools for controlling annotations, like bring text to front, or bring dimensions to front, or bring leaders, those of you using multi-leaders. You can bring each of those annotation types to the front. It'll put it in front of any other object in the drawing. There is also hiding in that list now. This is, I believe, added last year, I believe 2013. Don't hold me to that. But there's another feature called Bring All Annotations to Front. That's going to grab all of the text, dimensions, and leaders and put them in front of every other object in the file. There's another option called Send Hatches to Back. That'll do sort of the opposite. It'll just grab all the hatches in the drawing and push them all to the very back of the drawing stack. It won't change the order of the hatches relative to each other. It'll just push them all to the back of the drawing, the draw order, and that way lines and text and everything else will be in front of all your hatch patterns. Maybe the borders of a hatch pattern have somehow ended up behind the hatch itself. You can then push the hatch back behind the border very quickly using these features. So those are good ones to kind of experiment with in there. All right, so I've got a handful of others. You know, now the more that I think about this, maybe I'm going to have to do another webinar on this. The list kind of ran long here, and I see that there's quite a few questions, and I want to make sure that I get a chance to address some of these questions, and I see them adding up here. So let's go back through the list here. Whoops. Let me take a look at some of these questions. Let's see. I'm going to. There's a few questions in here that aren't necessarily they might be better asked during our AutoCAD Answers next month. I'll just point this out. Next month we're going to be doing an AutoCAD Answers. That's our kind of open topic question and answer forum. So I might suggest a couple of these you try and tune in, or if you have tech support with us, feel free to call in. We can discuss some of these. But I want to answer some of the questions relative to these tools. Let's see. I'm kind of reading through. When I right-click after selecting, then I get the menu. Fortunately, some of these are out of context now. I didn't catch them as I was discussing. Well, sorry, I'm just kind of reading through. This is where usually having a second person on hand is very helpful here. There was a question about how did you get the tabs on the upper left of the layouts. So this is a new feature. I assume we're talking about here these tabs across the top of the drawing. This is a new feature for 2014. I should have pointed that out. In 2014, they've introduced these file tab feature. So now we can click on these and click through the various drawings which are open. That's a nice feature. It also, you can hover on these and get previews of those files. If you are using 2014 and you're not seeing those tabs across the top, what you can do is go to the View tab on the ribbon, and we'll see that there is a button clear over here called File Tabs. So if that is blue, I'll see here that I get File Tabs displaying. If I click on that and turn it off, the File Tabs disappear. So that can be very handy. Sometimes maybe you need a little extra space for drafting and you don't want the tabs, you can go turn it off here real quick. Okay, so let's look through, reading through. Hi, regarding this command to VP rotate, what happens to text and dimensions? So that's a good question about where, the question was regarding that VP rotate assoc here. Which one did I put some text in here? So let's go to the layout tab here that shows this particular hatch, this piece of text in here. When I rotate, let's see what the setting is. VP rotate assoc is set to 0. Let me set that to 1 so that now when I rotate this viewport, we'll see that, and also might be helpful if I actually, I guess I didn't complete that command, send hatches to the back. There we go. So now we're going to see that when I rotated the viewport and the view rotated within it, my text and dimensions and everything will also rotate. It will keep everything aligned to the project as it was originally created. So this can be helpful for rotating everything. If the intent is to rotate all the text to another orientation, or to keep the text in the current orientation but to rotate the drawing beneath it, that's going to take a little bit more work. That's going to take other steps, and you know, it goes kind of beyond what we're talking about here. But it is possible to do that using, or basically to achieve that. It might not necessarily be automatic, but that can be done. Let's see. Going back, Barry asked, going back to select similar. I do not get the selection option box for select similar options. So if you are using, I think you're talking about the settings for select similar. That's important to remember. If I simply select an object, right-click and say Select Similar, it just goes right to it. It selects the similar objects. If you would like to change the settings for Select Similar, you have to type the command Select Similar. You have to initiate it from the command line or from dynamic input if you like. Once you start it by typing in Select Similar, then you will get on the command line the settings option here. You type SE for settings and it will, or no, now you can also click on it in the new versions, and here you can now change those options in there. All right, so I know there's a lot more questions in here. A lot of these were kind of, I don't want to take up too much time here. We're approaching the end of the session here, but I do want to, let me switch back here too. I do want to point out, I want to say thank you very much for attending this, and I think because I have still a pretty good long list of stuff I wanted to cover, I'm going to go ahead and add this to the list of future webinars, some of these other topics, and I'll also keep it handy for when we have those AutoCAD answer sessions, and it takes a little bit of time sometimes for the questions to start rolling in. So those of you who regularly attend these, we might cover a few more of these cool tricks in the future. Go ahead and give a few of these a try and call back. Tune in again for AutoCAD Answers next month, and we can discuss some of these other questions. If you are interested in upcoming webinars, feel free to check, or the best resources to go to our webpage, CAD-1.com. At the top, you'll see there's an events listing, or CAD-1.com/events. It'll take you right to that page, and you'll see all of our upcoming webinars. If you've been on there recently, you might not have seen this year's listings, but we've added those just in the very recent past. We've added in a bunch of other upcoming webinars. Those of you who use Civil 3D, we also have our Civil 3D upcoming events, upcoming webinars with Brian Haley. Next month I have AutoCAD Answers. I forget what the next webinar I'm conducting after that will be, but there'll be another specific topic. Those of you who are using Revit, you'll find Revit webinars there as well. I did try to record this webinar. I hope it worked. We usually have a different method when we have other people here. I'll try to get this posted to our YouTube channel, this webinar to our YouTube channel in the future. You can also find that on our CAD-1.com homepage. So really quickly, thanks for coming. We'll see you all next time. I really appreciate everybody who attends these. We've been getting a lot of great attendance. Find us here on all the usual social media outlets, and we'll see you all next month. Thanks again for attending.